I'm Rachel Edidin.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we are the hosts of Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men, a weekly podcast where we walk listeners through the ins, outs, and retcons of our very favorite superhero soap opera.
We're also the co-hosts of Rachel and Miles Review the X-Men,
which you're watching right now,
where we talk about all the X books that come out every week.
This week we have 7 X books for our sins. So I guess we better just dive in.
Yes, time's a-wastin'. Let's get X-Men-y.
So first up, let's get through the 2 Axis books this week. Axis number 6 is written by Rick Remender. It's got line art by Terry and Rachel Dodson and is colored by Edgar Delgado and Jesus Aburtov.
And it's actually the final part of Chapter 2, Act 2, I guess, of Axis, Inversion. So presumably some new things will happen in Part 3 of 3. But more importantly, we are 2/3 of the way done.
So what you said about, Chapter 2 of Part 2 with the numbering kind of brings home what's bugging me about this crossover event, other than that it's a crossover event. Because I don't universally hate crossover events, but this one strikes me as kind of combining some of the worst characteristics of a lot of them. In that it's got a concept that doesn't quite follow through in the execution. I mean, Axis, from the title to the story, is obviously set up to be a high-connected concept book. I mean, you've got Axis, and it's a pun because, Axis like good and evil, and Axis like Nazis, which the Red Skull is, and he's the main villain of this. And, Revolutions is a play on that. And you've got this logo, and the other day, I want to talk about the logo for a second, because again, I feel like it kind of crystallizes some of the problem. So the other day, my lady friend was over and was looking at it and was trying to figure out what it said. She hadn't been following the comic. She says, is it 6s? And, the logo looks the same right side up and upside down, which I guess is the point of it. But I feel like it's a great microcosm for the problem with the crossover, which is that the content completely gets lost in the concept.
Right, I mean, the idea of heroes and villains being inverted, it's entertaining, even if it does have a surprisingly simplistic view of morality, but whatever, I mean, superhero comics, so okay. But yeah, I mean, we see an inverted Mystique in this one, who's just, it's not so much that it's Mystique who's inverted, it's someone who looks like Mystique and just comes off as a generic do-gooder kind of character. And that doesn't always happen. Remender does have good voices for some of the characters, I really like his Tony Stark. I think because Tony Stark is kind of a dick all the time, really, and this is just a different flavor of dick. Yeah,
no, I think that nails it. The characters who Inversion works with are the ones who are basically, where different parts of their personalities, just different aspects of those characters we've seen become dominant. And we'll be discussing this in a lot more length with Magneto in particular when we get to that title. But I think it's something consistent across the X-Men in particular, and it's one of the reasons the X-Men work a lot better than the Avengers and Axis, because the Avengers are just cartoonish caricatures of bad guys at this point. And the X-Men, on the other hand, are taking an arc that, while it's not in character for them, is a logical inversion of their normal moral stance.
Mm-hmm. And we do see a lot more of that this issue. It's previously been very Avengers-y. We're seeing more X-Men. That said, I think two of the characters that really do work well in this issue are Thor and Loki. We see Thor, who's a lot more like the pre-wordiness Thor, before he had left Mjolnir, and Loki, who's that sort of grayish, fun character that we've seen lately. And I buy that. It's actually really sad the way that works out in this issue.
Yeah, the characters who are coming out of Axis and getting the most out of Axis and interacting with Axis the most interestingly are characters who are fundamentally and consistently morally gray. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something carrying throughout. It's a fun book. I like some of the ways it's playing with characters. I really like the what-if direction it's taking the X-Men. It's fascinating. But as an event, it's confusing, it's sprawling, it's interacting poorly and inconsistently with other lines. I mean, Avengers vs. X-Men, I can complain about until the end of the day, but at least it was fairly consistent across the line, and at least, it was working from a fairly simple premise and executed it fairly directly. Axis is a mess.
So we'll roll right into Axis Revolutions number 2. This is a companion comic to Axis, the same way that AVX was a companion to Avengers vs. X-Men, and it's similarly inessential. It basically, features a couple stories every issue that tie into what's going on. Sometimes that works really well, like the Doctor Strange story in the last issue. This is a mixed bag. Anyway, we have 2 stories in this one. First off, Ain't the Man I Used to Be, written by Frank Thierry, with art by Paul Davidson and color by Rochelle Rosenberg, and Hammered, written by Kevin Moorer, with art by David LaFuente and Alvaro Lopez, and colors by Jim Charalampidis, I think.
So here's a question about the first story. The first story is a Sabretooth story, And I am getting the really distinct impression that Sabretooth is basically just going to be straight up Age of Apocalypse Sabretooth.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's pretty clear they're positioning him as the new Wolverine, post-Wolverine, until Wolverine comes back from the dead in like 10 minutes or whenever that
Everyone
is.
can be Wolverine.
But yeah, the first story...
We're both Wolverine.
It's true. The first story is... There's not a lot to say about it. Nightcrawler's mean now. Sabretooth is nice now. They fight. The art's nice, and that's really about it. The second story I thought was a lot cooler. Now, this isn't particularly an X-Men story. It's about, it's kind of more of the Thor stuff that we saw in the current issue of Axis. It's basically Thor and a reporter kind of going on this cross-country adventure while Thor is getting increasingly drunk.
Now, when Miles says adventure, he actually means bender.
Yes, Bender. There's a lot of stuff smashed, including a certain thunder god, but also a bunch of scenery. And it's actually really funny. Like, Thor being a jerk is hilarious, it turns out. And it's a little sad because, you know, he's this heroic, noble dude, and now he's not. But I was laughing out loud at
What do you mean it
this.
turns out? I feel like Douche Bro Thor is a comedy standby of Marvel.
I think it definitely can be, and in this case it is.
It's usually younger Thor. It's usually not current Thor. But yeah, it's just, it's fairly charming.
Mm-hmm. So, is it an essential Axis book? No. An essential X-Men book? No. A fun Thor story? Sure.
Next up, we are going to move away from crossovers for a little while with X-Force number 12. This is written by Simon Spurrier, drawn by Rockhay Kim, with colors by Jose Villarrubia. If you've been following these reviews, you know that we have been enjoying the hell out of this book. It is not a title that everyone's going to like. It is extremely violent, it's extremely wordy, it's extremely stylized. For us, those things are working well. X-Force is, and has always been and kind of remains, the extremely morally gray team of the X universe. Axis has got me thinking in D&D alignment, so I'm going to say the chaotic neutral team.
Yes, very much so.
And right now, it's in one of its weirder incarnations, partially as a result of the lineup, partially as the result of Spurrier and Kim as a creative team. And this issue very much continues that and escalates from a point from which I wasn't sure it was going to be possible to escalate, which is impressive.
Yeah, this is definitely a book that's consistently surprising, both in terms of what happens and in terms of how it portrays what happens. Mm-hmm. This is an issue that's really all about betrayals and disappointments and shock in ways that really feel earned. But as you said, Rachel, if you don't like ultra-violence, if you don't like comics that are really dark and really strange, then, you know, you might not dig this as much. If you do, it's great.
One of the complaints we've heard a lot about this book is that it's really wordy, which it really is. And I will say I will say it probably goes a little bit over, especially in this issue, but one of the things that I like most about it is that it makes really good use of something that's almost unique to comics as a medium, which is parallel narratives. Mm-hmm. And the difference between the slight discord between the internal monologue of a character, which is the narration of any given issue, the actual dialogue, and the action in the panels is something that Spurrier and Kim use to tremendous effect in this issue and others.
After that, it is Storm number 5. That's written by, once again, Greg Pak, with art by Victor Ibanez and Craig Ewing, and colors by Ruth Redmond. So this is the second part of the story that started in the last issue, with Storm and Yukio and some weird arena stuff going on, and crime syndicates. And the last issue we weren't big fans of. I like this one better. It's still not as strong as the first 3, say, but it's interesting. It features Storm getting thrown into a situation that she really doesn't want to deal with, trying really hard to find a way out of it in some unexpected ways, and learning a lot about Wolverine, whose place she's kind of taking in this arena as she does so, and then finding that no matter how much she cares, no matter how hard she tries, things still don't always work because the world is a much darker place than she realizes.
A consistent theme in Pax Storm has been Aurora finding the limits of what she can and can't affect, and of what she should and shouldn't. That's been the case throughout. And this continues it in really, really interesting ways and takes her into really ethically interesting territory. I'm not a huge fan of this version of Yukio, which biases me significantly. I will say the parts of the story revolving around Storm, the interactions, and also just Storm's disillusionment with Yukio, that particular clash and evolution, ring really true to me.
Yeah, in a way, this whole series just feels like Storm after the Morlock tunnels and that old Uncanny arc where she stabbed Callisto for the first time, really questioning who she is and her role in the world, and it's a beautiful examination of that. Supposedly, this book, sales-wise, is not doing so hot, so as a personal plea, this is a really good book overall. If you're not buying it, please buy it. Please tell your friends to buy it. I really want to see this book survive. It would be a damn shame if one of Marvel's best female characters and best characters of color lost the solo book she'd been waiting so long to get.
Yeah, this has been a consistently excellent series. Its quality within that has wavered, but it's been well above the bar of books we'd be getting anyway. It's a great series. If you're a fan of the character, or if you just want to see a very different angle of interacting with the X-Men and their world, fantastic art and terrific writing. It's a really good title to pick up, and I'd actually say it's also a particularly good title for people who want to read an X-tangential book but aren't huge fans of X-Men team stories, because it's really, really very much its own thing.
Yeah, pick it up. Highly recommend it overall.
So, next up we have Uncanny X-Men number 28. It's written by Brian Michael Bendis, and contrary to what both the cover of the issue and Marvel.com will tell you, it is drawn and colored by Chris Anka, who also did the cover art. And man, Marvel, you gotta stop doing this. Literally every single even-numbered issue of this book has this problem, and I know for a fact that you don't print that far out. So, yeah, you need just like hand the covers to your proofreader at some point between the solicitation copy and when they actually go out the door, please, because this is confusing. That said, this is a really good issue. This continues the story where it left off, which is built around a mutant named Matthew Malloy. This is a nearly omnipotent, basically reality bender, whose powers Xavier had been suppressing for decades, and who, after Xavier's death, is finally sort of coming unleashed. S.H.I.E.L.D. had been responding to him, the X-Men had been responding to him, and in the midst of this, Cyclops had basically just stepped up and bogarted him.
Yeah, and so this book has always been the kind of modern-era Cyclops-focused book, and so we've seen a lot of good Scott Summers character development, but I really like where it's going right now, because with Matthew Malloy, he's got this kind of opportunity to rewrite the map of mutant-human relations, and I like seeing what a nuanced take on the changes the character is going through this book is giving us. It's not just like he was like Xavier, now he's like Magneto. No, he's doing things very much in his own way, not really in anyone's shadow so much as stepping out of their legacy.
Yeah, Cyclops' evolution over the last few years, really I think maybe starting with the Utopia era of X-Men, has been moving away from being portrayed as a very, very black and white character, and a character who very much acts in service, often almost unthinkingly, to Xavier's dream and mission, to one who really recognizes and is grappling with nuance. And this continues that and is very much part of that arc. It also does something that I think is really, really clever. So this issue is basically a conversation. And making that work and visually dynamic is always a challenge. Bendis and Anka take an approach which is not off of Wally Wood's classic 22 panels, which is basically to set the whole thing against the backdrop of a reality-bending mutant trying to control his powers, which means that you get a very, very visually exciting arc and narrative tract, but also a very, very human one. Anka's also a terrific colorist. He doesn't tend to do his own colors a lot on this series, and it's nice seeing him do that because he's great at it.
Right. I remember you were mentioning when we were talking earlier, there's a scene in which Cyclops is telling Matthew Malloy about sort of his own history with the X-Men, and we have 3 horizontal panels of different eras of them, and you were talking about the color saturation there.
Yeah, it goes from a sort of very, very, very washed out, faded one with the original 5 to just increasingly saturated and intense as it goes down, and it's lovely. He's also just, as a colorist, really, really good with light and light contrast. It's a great issue. I think it's continuing a very, very strong run on the book, and it's taking it into, I genuinely don't know where it's going to go from here, and I'm really enjoying that.
Next is Magneto number 12. This is once again written by Cullen Bunn, with art by Roland Bashi, and colors by Lee Loffridge. This book basically shows a lot of the initial battle in Axis from Magneto's perspective, and damn if it isn't way, way more compelling than it was in the actual crossover.
Yeah, of all the books that have tied into Axis, including Axis itself, Magneto is consistently the most compelling.
That said, we haven't been reading the Avengers ones, but you're here for X-Men anyway. So once again, it's a dark and grim take on both the character and on the Marvel Universe, and that's often really boring, like it's just, oh look, it's the Dark Knight Returns again. But in this, it's nuanced, again, that word, nuanced, and just interesting. Magneto's a character with a huge amount of history. He's been a hero, he's been a villain, back and forth, and this book acknowledges all of that while really having him straddle that line once again. We also have some, I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but it gets chilling toward the end of the book as Magneto is confronted by what may or may not be the specter of Charles Xavier and is just falling apart psychologically as he does so. The writing on this is beautiful. I was not expecting the character to go in these directions, just like Cyclops. New exciting things are happening with ancient characters. It's great.
Something that gets played with a lot in X-Men is the Xavier-Magneto duality. And something that's not examined enough in X-Men is the places where that duality falls apart as both characters evolve and change, particularly Magneto. This book does a beautiful, beautiful job calling back to that, and a beautiful job bringing it up to the present, even in context of Axis. I mean, again, I'm not a fan of Axis even on the scale of events, but this is a really worthwhile thing coming out of it. Finally, we have a second really solid event tie-in this week. I don't know what's going on with that, but this is Death of Wolverine, the Weapon X Program #2. It is written by Charles Soule, who also wrote Death of Wolverine, drawn by Salvador Larroca, and colored by Frank Darmada. We mentioned last issue that this is one of the more surprising and stronger spin-off books to come out of the Death of Wolverine, and that continues to be the case here. It's essentially about a group of semi-amnesiac, obviously heavily modified by the Weapon X program soldiers who've escaped from the program and are now on the run together. It's a really good, dark, interesting, supernatural mystery and heist. It's a really good team book. It actually reminds me, thinking about it, a lot of BPRD, especially early BPRD.
Yeah, I would completely agree. All these bizarre characters who are all trying to figure out how they fit into the world and how they fit in with each other. It's really quite compelling, seeing the secrets they reveal to each other, the secrets they still keep from each other, the, creepy mystery surprise bad things that are going on without anyone's knowledge except the readers.
Yeah, Soule is very much doing John Arcudi in terms of how he's writing this and the tone of the book, and especially the way he's playing individual characterization versus team dynamic, and that's a huge selling point for a book like this.
I also like the little nods to continuity, like at the beginning when Sharp is, maybe through Wolverine's memories, maybe not, remembering Wolverine and Kitty Pryde coming back from Japan from the Kitty Pryde and Wolverine miniseries, and she's still in that ice skating
Except
costume.
Here's the thing, he's clearly misremembering that, because she definitely wasn't wearing that outfit at the end of the miniseries. She's just wearing it at the beginning. Wolverine was never in a plane with her when she was wearing it.
I feel like this inconsistency is actually going to tie the entire plot together.
No.
If we were writing it would.
No, but you mentioned about Sharp, that he's got some of Logan's memories, and the question of who Sharp is and what his connection to Wolverine is one that's gotten much more interesting in the second issue. I mentioned in our review of the first issue that I felt like this was a series that would be stronger if it weren't tied to the Death of Wolverine, and I am going to take that back with issue 2, because the connections are now proving some of the most interesting aspects of it. The main character may or may not be Wolverine or have a connection to Wolverine, or at least have some of Wolverine's memories, and throughout the issue, Wolverine's kind of advice and inner monologue is played against this character's conscious thoughts. And it's a really, really cool internal dynamic, and it's a very, very good backdrop to the story.
A very pleasant surprise, this series. I'd say it's worth checking out. So what's our issue of the week?
Unsurprisingly, I think our issue of the week is Uncanny X-Men '28. It's a really solid issue, continuing a really solid run. Interesting character stuff, great storytelling. If you're not reading this is I'd say the core X book to be picking up right now.
Absolutely.
That's the issue. What's our panel?
Our panel is actually from this week's issue of Magneto. It's toward the end, during the scene that we referenced, where he's talking to that specter of Xavier, and there's just this one panel that perfectly captures just the uncertainty, the instability, just how almost broken the character has become by having everything pulled out from under him like this. I love the way his eyes are a little bit uneven. He's not blinking away the blood. His hands are just sort of awkwardly in front of him, and he's staring kind of out of focus. I like that Xavier's kind of ghost head is only barely visible in the panel. It's really off-kilter, and it lets you get inside the head of a character who's normally very together and very stoic.
I want to point out, too, that this panel is part of a terrific sequence, and I'm actually going to put up that whole progression for a second, because I want to talk about that for a moment. One of the things you most often see with Xavier and Magneto facing off or having conversations is Xavier's face. Xavier very expressive, and Magneto stoic and hidden behind the mask. This is a really beautiful inversion of that. It's Magneto pleading, kind of naked, and Xavier is just impassive. You can't see his face for a lot of it, and when you do, it's expressionless and it doesn't change. It's really creepy. It's really dramatic.
So, 7 books later, we are caught up.
Yay! If you're enjoying what you're seeing in these video reviews, please check out our podcast, Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men. You can find it at rachelandmiles.com on iTunes and on Stitcher. New episodes go up every Sunday, along with visual companions at rachelandmiles.com. We also post additional content there during the week, including written posts, art, and much more.
This episode, we are covering the Demon Bear Saga by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz from New Mutants. This is where Sienkiewicz first came into the X-Men universe, well, aside from that one Dracula issue. And it's incredible. Like, this really changed the way superhero comics could work. And if you'd like to hear us gush about how much we enjoy weird, sketchy, cartoony stuff,
so much,
then this is definitely the episode for you.
These video reviews, as well as the podcast, are made possible by the generous support of our Patreon subscribers. Thank you guys so much. If you want to help make these continue to happen and unlock some more cool stuff, please click down the link below to the Patreon and consider supporting the podcast.
We'll see you next week for, I think, a mere 3 issues, provided we don't get inverted and get stuck in kind of a boring crossover first.
So, man, what would Inversion Rachel and Miles be like?
Oh, that's a really good question. So it's like D&D alignment to start, right?
Okay. So you're obviously like lawful to neutral good. So Inversion Miles is chaotic evil.
So I'd be walking down the street just biting the head off of every puppy or frog that I see.
No, you wouldn't. Oh my god. No. Inversion Miles is a pickup artist.
Ah! No.
It's because charisma's your high stat. Like, it's the obvious inversion.
I knew this event was no good. Okay, change the subject. What about you?
Okay, so I'm chaotic good to chaotic neutral, which means that I would be lawful evil.
Okay.
And I'm thinking what that means for me, given my career in life, is that I would basically sell out. I would go and work for the man, probably in a context that exploited artists directly, and I'd probably be able to dress like this because I can modify the way I currently dress to slightly more cynically douche-bro-y pretty easily. Just add scarves. So the main visual, I'd need a visual cue. I'd probably have to lose the sunglasses.
Wait, is there anything even behind there? I've never seen.
No, it's basically like that horror story, The Green Ribbon. Like, I take them off, my eyes fall out.
Or your head just inexplicably falls off. Like, how does that even work?
Evil?
Inversion.